Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Pastor Girley, and I'm just admitting a few people in, so periodically I'll be doing that. But welcome to session two, as we continue our discussion about Africa's contribution to the Bible. By way of review, last week, the main things that we established is that from a biblical perspective, we had some clues that informed us that the Garden of Eden may have been actually located in Africa, or certainly in close proximity to Africa. If you recall, we established that by looking at some geographical clues that the Bible provided to us. Primarily, it lists 4 rivers, and it gave the description in terms of where these rivers were located, what countries they went through. We're going to see in the map today, again, by way of refreshment, that 2 of these rivers flowed right through Africa. So we feel confident. And then part of this course is to see what secular or extra biblical sources give support to the statements, the conclusions that are made in the Bible. And when we looked at our secular sources, we saw without question that all credible paleontologists and archaeologists and other types of scientists that study, genetic scientists or geneticists, have concluded without any doubt or contradiction among themselves that man's origin was in Africa, particularly on the east coast of Africa. So there's that science. And then we looked at Mendel's law at the end, where it talked about that dark skin was a dominant color. And the point of that is that you can't get a dark skin as a heir or a descendant of 2 purely light-skinned original parents. But you can go in the other direction. You can get a light skin or a fair skin descendant from 2 dark skinned parents, because Mendel explained that. And if you took the time to go and look at Mendel, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But what Mendel talked about is variation or mutation, meaning that over time, when you multiply something, there's going to be some type of distortion. And then that distortion will amplify and multiply itself. And then over time, again, there'll be more distortion. And so ultimately you get the changes. And lastly, we talked about the fact that people were dark because they were living near the equator and they needed more melanin. And we offered this information to refute the notion that black skin is somehow a curse. What we established, and what we'll further establish as we move into session 2, is that black skin was a protection. It was the opposite of what a curse is. So now and then, let's go to the outline, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. As before, if you have questions, by all means, state those questions in the chat room, and as soon as we can, we'll get to them. So let me see if I can share this with you. And again, I don't know if you can see that. Let me get you over there to sharing my screen. How about now? Can you see the? Okay. I apologize. Keep in mind that your instructor is somewhat technically challenged. But we're on session 2 now. And the point that we're going to establish is that once the great flood happened, which is depicted in between Genesis chapters 6 through 9, once humanity got on the other side of the flood, it was necessary for the earth to be repopulated. And you keep in mind, if you go back to Genesis chapter 2, God tells Adam and Eve to be fruitful and to multiply and to replenish the earth. It was always God's plan for humanity to spread out over the entire face of the earth, not to be clustered in one specific location, for many reasons. God built this big, beautiful earth with enough resources to support every form of creation that he put on planet Earth, but men tend to cluster in one location and then fight over the narrow resources. And so God said, spread out. All right, so now there's been the destruction, and now God is saying the same thing again, this time to Noah. What we will observe as we go down is that Noah had 3 sons. Noah's sons were Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Can you see that? And let me now click on the passage of scripture that actually says that. Can you see the passage of scripture? And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Now that's important because it seems to me like that same language was used, as I said a moment ago, in Genesis chapter 2. God starts off his relationship with humanity by pronouncing a blessing on them. He pronounces a blessing on him. You know, when we think about who God is and what his intentions and his motives are toward us, I think it just tells us right here. It's so important for us to park and to reflect on the fact that from the beginning, in the case of Adam and Eve, in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, and again here in chapter 9, which is, as we're going to discuss it, a rebirth of humanity, as it were. God is saying, I want to bless you. I want to prosper you. I want to strengthen you. I want you to have lots of babies. I want you to be happy. I want you to be complete. It is always God's intent for us to be blessed. It is the enemy's intent for us to be in bondage. And it is the enemy's intent further to plant it in our small little minds that somehow God is the big ogre in the sky and that he doesn't want us to have life. But Jesus said it was the thief and the robber who came to steal, kill, and to destroy. But I have come that you might have life. So now we see in verse 1, chapter 9, God is blessing Noah. And not just Noah, but what? His sons. That's important because when we go further into our study, you got to understand that everyone that proceeds from this point on planet Earth are blessed. God has already declared a blessing on them. And then I want to skip down for time's sake to verse 9. Do you see verse 9? Because God says something to him here, which is significant. And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and who? Your seed after. So one of the things, if you study scripture, what you learn is that God is a God of agreement. God is a God of covenant. God likes to be in a relationship with his creation, in which there's an understanding, there's a spelled out agreement in terms of how things are going to proceed going forward. And typically when we think about who are the covenant and the blessed people of planet Earth as it relates to God, we think about the Jewish nation. And in fact, Israel is blessed. A point of fact, though, in terms of biblical history, what we should see and what we should park on here for purposes of this conversation is that before God entered into covenant relationship with Israel, with Jacob and his descendants, with Abram and his descendants, he entered into a covenant relationship and he pronounced a blessing upon who? Noah, Shem, Japheth, and yes, actually, for purposes of this discussion, who? Ham, right? Ham, because the reason why we point that out is because Ham is maligned. He's thought of in Europe as the cursed one, but here we see that God has pronounced a blessing upon Noah, and God has entered into a covenant with Noah, and not just Noah, but also Japheth, Shem, and Ham. So that's significant. Well, let's get back to our text. Now then Ham, which is Noah's son, which we talked about, is someone who theologians, particularly European theologians, say is the progenitor or the father of all Black people on planet Earth. I can agree with that statement to some degree, and I can disagree with that statement, and I'll tell you why as we get further into this discussion today. And again, remember, if you have questions or comments, please tell me what those questions and comments are. But let's go to what is commonly referred to as the Table of Nations. Can you see this? Genesis 10:1, it says, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, or Gomer, Magog, Media, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshkish, and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, and he goes on. All right, but for purposes of this discussion, I want to go to verse 6. Can you see that? Now it says here that, and the sons of Ham were, what was the first name mentioned here? Cush. Second name is Mizraim, and the third name is Phut, and the fourth name is Canaan. And if you've been studying the Bible, you've heard a lot about Canaan, right? I mean, Canaan is mentioned substantially in the Bible, particularly when we look at the conquest of Canaan, which was the quote unquote promised land of the Hebrews. But I want to focus on Cush because this course is about Africa's contribution to the Bible. Now, I want to come back out to the outline, and you'll see why in just a moment. But I just wanted to show you that Ham's sons, the first one listed was Cush. Now, I want to tell you something about Cush, but instead of telling you, I want to show you. Well, first of all, I guess I should tell you Ham. Let's start with Ham. Do you see down there where it said Ham equals hot? Now, what's implied there, now again, we're stacking and we're building on last week's conversation. Remember, we have melanin in our skin because we originate from a hot climate, right? Near the equator. We know today that that's true, that if those who live near the equator, it's hot, and the people even today tend to be very dark skinned who live near the equator. So what's implied by that very definition is that these are the people who live in the land that is hot. Oh, it's an indirect way of referring to Africa. But if you doubt me, and you are allowed to doubt the teacher, now we're getting into the meat of our conversation. Can you see the further language which says a name of Egypt properly is domestic name amongst the Egyptians themselves? So now this is important because we refer to these people as Egyptians. We talked about that last week. And the Romans refer to them actually as Egypt. The Greeks refer to them as Egyptus. But these people themselves refer to themselves as Hamites or Camites. Let's read. So Ham and Cam is the same thing. Ham, the son of Noah, to have been the ancestor of Egyptians among other nations. This, of course, was the simple, and I don't want to, there it is down in the middle. I apologize. So if you go down, can you see where my cursor is? All right, that's what I want to focus on for a moment. So how do we know that Ham and Egypt is the same place? Well, I'm going to show you in scripture, but I'm going to also show you right here. And this is, again, for you Bible scholars, this is from the concordance. I know that the concordance is not the end all be all, but it's a reference source that is recognized by most Christians, certainly Christian evangelicals. So that's why I'm using it, just for that reason, not to say that it isn't total and complete authority, but it is important. So when you go into the actual Egyptian tombs where they find the mummies, where they find the writings, all of that, their writing is referred to as hieroglyphics, okay? And in their language, they refer to their land as KM or Cam. They didn't have the same syllables, or rather the same vowels that we had, but basically it was pronounced Cam. And they link Ham to Cam. So that's very important because now we see that actually this name that we refer to as Egypt is actually the same place as Ham. And I'll show you this further in scripture in just a moment. Let's move on for time's sake. I'm going to tell you, can you see in the outline number C or letter C? Ham had 4 sons, and we're focusing on one particular son because who this guy is and what he does and what his descendants do is going to be informative to this study going forward. But one of his sons' name was Cush, which you've heard me say a couple times. But now let's go back to this same concordance and break this word down. This name Cush. You see how it's pronounced Cush? And you see here, Cush equals what? All right, so whenever the Bible is referring to Cush, it's referring to Black people. This is not an extra biblical source, which is, in other words, we're not drawing outside of the Bible, we're drawing on the actual statement of what's in the Bible. And then you come down here to B, the son of Ham, the grandson of Noah, and the progenitor of the southernmost peoples located in Africa. So Cush means Black. Now, let's back up and for time's sake, Brooke, I want you just to, I don't know, I'll see if I can do it. Stop sharing the screen just for a moment. Can you do that for me? Or do I need to do that? I'm trying to see. Anyway, while we're trying to figure that out, what I want to do is spend some time explaining this and backing up and discussing it. If you recall, in our discussion, we talked about the fact that if someone's father is Black, right, or if someone's son is Black, what does that indicate to you? Can a man have a Black son and himself not be Black? Or if Cush is Black, and let me come at it this way, and Ham is Black, what does that tell us about Noah? Class, anyone?
He was Black.
Biologically, are we making a leap? And I will entertain any thought on that. If Cush is Black, the Bible tells us that. And all European theologians that for their own negative reasons wanted to make Ham Black, if he's Black and Cush is Black, what's the likelihood that Noah's Black? Class?
He's Black.
Got to be Black, right? Biologically. Now, can you see then that this information is clearly in the Bible, but clearly we have not seen it because clearly it hasn't been discussed. Clearly it hasn't been emphasized. Now, folks, again, when Pastor Girley says something like this, I've loaded up the outline with links so that you can go ahead and vet it and further research it, because this is not about coming into agreement with Pastor Girley about anything. But in this class, I have one overarching goal, and that is to make you think about what you haven't been thinking about, but you've just accepted as on its face as carte blanche. Cush is Black. Ham is Black. Well,
Noah's Black.
Noah's Black. Now let's jump back to the extra biblical sources. That seems to comport with what the genetic scientist said, right? You see how that is, how it's working? It is not in disagreement. It accords with what the genetic scientists have concluded, that everyone on planet Earth today is linked to someone who is Black. Now, if you were in the class last week, you heard me ask the question, well, why is that important? Well, the question is, why is the truth important? If the truth is not important, then this is not important. If the truth can't make you free, then it doesn't matter, because the opposite of truth is error. And if the degree of truth you have equates to the degree of freedom you have, then the degree of error that you walk in also equates to the degree of bondage that you walk in. So that's why truth is powerful. What you think and what you know about yourself is so important. And what you think and know about others is important as well. Now, as I was reflecting on this class for today, the scripture came to mind. What are the greatest commandments, right? One of them. What's the number one greatest commandment? Anyone in the class, you can shout it out if you know.
You should love God.
Love him, right? With all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? What's the second commandment?
You should love God.
What? Love
Love your neighbor as yourself.
as thyself. So if you have to love your neighbor as yourself, what does that imply about yourself? Do I have to love myself?
You gotta love yourself.
Yeah, now there we go. Now there we go. We have to love ourselves. How can we love ourselves completely if we don't know ourselves? If we have relied upon other people to tell us stuff about ourselves, and the stuff that they told us made us not love ourselves. Did you see that? We talked about that somewhat last week. Self-hate. I don't like my lips. My lips are too big. My nose is too wide. My hips are too wide. My thighs are too thick. My skin is too dark. My hair is too curly, too nappy. Not realizing that all of this is a blessing and a provision by God based upon where he situated us, where he planted us on planet Earth. We have to know ourselves if we're going to love ourselves. And it is inherently important to know ourselves and love ourselves before we try to love anyone else. We're out there trying to love everyone else and we don't even love ourselves. It's not going to work. It can't work. There's a systematic way that we have to go at getting to the place where we are in racial harmony, where we can cooperate with each other. I got to know myself before I try to know you. I got to get along with myself. So we have to do homework. That's the point, about ourselves. And there's so much of what we need to know that is right in the scripture. Now, on that note, let me go back to sharing my screen. Can y'all see that? Or what do you see right now? Let me see here. You see the screen. But I cannot stress enough that Cush is black. Now, have you heard of the country called Sudan? Modern day Sudan? Actually, there's Sudan and now there's Southern Sudan. So Southern Sudan is the most recently developed and formed nation that is recognized by the United Nations. But does anyone in the class know where Sudan and Southern Sudan are?
Africa.
Africa. What? You're right. What part of Africa?
East Africa.
Northeast Africa.
Coffee factor, yeah.
Okay. Just due south of Egypt. Okay. Now, this is a geography class. Does anyone know where the name Sudan comes from? The origins of that name? It's Arabic. And I'm going to, in light of in the spirit of this class, I want you guys to take a wild guess what that Arabic term actually means.
Black.
Black. There you go. It means black. By definition, consistent with Cush. And it is the same geographical place that historically was recognized as Cush. Now, can you see the map? Okay. Remember, and this is some, this map exists in many different biblical I've seen this map in many different biblical sources. But Ham, we know if you look at a map today, this is Egypt, right? Can you see that? Where my cursor is moving? That is Egypt and some into Libya. But on the biblical map that I'm showing you, it is recognized as Ham. And Ham goes all the way down into, this would be modern day Sudan. Okay, but it's all Ham. But I want you to go up here and notice up here, what's up there? What's that? What is that? You see that where it says Canaan?
Israel and all that.
That's Israel. So that was also considered a part of the land of Ham. This map is showing largely where the descendants of Ham went and lived at some point. So Ham is black. We established that, right? Let's do some quick review. And Cush is black, right? And Canaan was one of Ham's sons and one of Cush's brothers. Well, what color was Canaan? Class?
Black.
Is there anyone out there in this class, and I'm really not trying to call anyone out, I'm actually asking you to think about it logically, because it builds on itself from this point forward. Is there anyone out there that would say, no, Canaan was, the people of Canaan were some other color? Canaan's father was black. Canaan's brother was black. Canaan was in a black family. Was Canaan adopted? Of course not. All right, now, remember, one of the rivers flowed going back to the garden, flowed through the entire land of Ethiopia. I told you last week that generally speaking, when the Bible uses the term Ethiopia, it is a reference to Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the first names mentioned, can you see this little name down here? Havilah. Can you see that? That is modern day Ethiopia / Eritrea. One of the rivers that flowed out of the Garden of Eden, according to scripture, went right through this place here. And correct me, guys, if I'm wrong, but if you want to do some quick review on this, go over to Genesis chapter 2. Yeah, where it talks about the Garden of Eden. So it all kind of lines up on top of itself. So I'm coming out of this now, and I'm moving on. Cush had 6 sons: Seba, Havilah, Sabbath, Ramah, Sabbathoth, and Nimrod. Nimrod we'll talk about further later. We actually will come down to right here and talk about Nimrod. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. Nimrod is discussed in Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 through 12. Again, by way of reference, that is referred to as the Table of Nations. Why is Nimrod important? Because according to scripture, he's one of the first ones to establish an empire. It says it right there in Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 through 12. And he actually founded a couple of cities. One is Babel. You heard of Babel, right? And another is Erech, E-R-E-C-H. Do you see that right here? Can you see that? Which is modern day Iraq. And then there was the Akkadian Empire, which if you are a nerd of history, you would know that that was a mighty empire, Sumer. But so that we get an understanding of who Nimrod was, the guy who was responsible for establishing Iraq and Babylon and the Akkadian Empire. And actually Nineveh, if you read, he was responsible for establishing that city as well. And Nineveh was the capital city of what country? Anyone? Assyria. All right, so Nimrod, let's just do some quick. Nimrod's dad was what color? Black. Nimrod's dad was Cush. Nimrod's grandfather was who? Ham.
Ham.
So what color was Nimrod?
Black too.
Black.
Am I skipping? Am I adding something that's not there? That's important. Am I saying something that I have not actually shown you in scripture? And hopefully, like I said last time, if you would have gone ahead and read this, you would know that I'm not in any way deviating from the biblical text. I'm just showing you what you should have seen, what we all should have seen long ago, but for whatever reason, it was not emphasized. It wasn't hidden, or it was hidden to us rather. I'm keeping in mind time. I've discussed Cush and all of that. I'm going to the next. There was a question. Are there any questions? I'm sorry. I'm trying to find it. Give me 1 second. Are there any questions or comments? You can ask questions or you can make a comment. This class is meant to be interactive, but I don't see any. Did someone say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, as I read, I noticed they made note that Noah was a farmer once they once the ark was settled. But then it may note that Nimrod was a mighty hunter. Any specific reason why that was? Because of, when we think of hunter, we think of like warrior type.
Yeah, so it's a good question that you, and this kind of gets into the science. The hunter-gatherers, they were people who hunted and gathered. That was one way that people sustained themselves. And the other was through farming. That was more of a passive, stationary thing. So Noah was stationary. He planted his flag and he was living in a specific location. Now, if you get into just secular history, and it's a good question, and that question is coming from Nathan Carrington, you see that every civilization, major civilization that lasted thousands and thousands of years, what gave rise to the civilization was that they were near some major source of water, likely a river mostly. So let's just do some checking off of history. The Nile River gave rise to what? The Egyptian Empire, or Kemet, which we will call it going forward. The Tigris and the Euphrates River gave rise to the Babylonian and the Assyrian Empire. The Yangtze and the Yellow River gave rise to what empire that we know today that's still kicking? Most popular nation in the world, China. You should get a little clue here. The Indus River gave rise to what civilization most likely? India. So we see that one thing that drove the development of stable civilizations was the fact that people situated themselves near rivers, and they were able to grow enough food so that wasn't their primary concern, and they could go on and think about other things. But prior to that, and alongside of that, one way that people did it is that they moved around a lot, they hunted and they gathered. So Nimrod was the latter kind of guy. He was out there trying to conquer the world, literally, establishing things and building things. That was who he was. And yes, so he was different. He was more aggressive, arguably, than his father and his grandfather and great-grandfather. That's what I see in the text. Any other questions or comments? That's a very good question. All right. I'm now at C. Can you see C? Okay. It says, let us turn our attention to Egypt now, because from this point forward, this one country will significantly inform our study. Egypt was not always the nation, one nation, rather. That's important. For centuries, it was divided into two separate people. And I'm going to go to the upper and lower to discuss what that upper and lower is. Egypt was divided into two separate people, upper and lower. Let's go to the map. Can you see the map? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of counterintuitive. You see at the top, it's referred to as what?
Lower.
And at the bottom, it's referred to as what?
Upper.
Upper. Now, how is that? Let me explain it to you. This is a reference to the flow of the Nile River. Egypt is flat at the northern part of the country. It's mountainous in the southern part of the country. So as the river flows down, they're making reference to the direction that the river flows. You see that? So we have upper and lower, and they were two distinct civilizations until a man named Neymar, also called Menes, established or brought them two together and established what is called the first dynasty of Egypt. Egypt had a total of 30 dynasties. What's a dynasty? It's the rule of a family, basically. Okay. It means I become the king and I rule for a while. And then let me see if I can stop sharing here at this moment. I apologize, because I want to just give me 1 second. I see it. I see it. I'm okay. I'll keep talking. I'm trying to do, there it is. Can y'all see me now? I just didn't want to distract you while I'm trying to explain something very important to you. I apologize for the technical glitches. Neymar, who's also referred to as Menes, was the first pharaoh of Egypt. And I just wanted to show you that. Now I'm going to actually go back to sharing. I apologize, but you need to see Neymar. That is actually a bust that exists, I believe, in a museum in Munich, Germany. The reason why it's in Germany is because the Germans were one of the first European nations to develop Egyptology, which was a particular division of archaeology. Can you look at this guy's face? Can y'all see him? Does he seem to have some Negroid features?
Look at that nose.
Right. This is the first, indisputably, the first pharaoh of Egypt. Well, that kind of lines up with everything that we have been discussing so far. So I wanted you to see his face, because this is not speculation. This is not some artistic rendering of Neymar or Menes. By the way, Menes founded the Egyptian city of Memphis. It was named after him. And Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, just historically. Now I want to go to D. The people that we refer to as Egyptians refer to themselves, as I've discussed already, as Kemet. We saw in Strong's that actually when you go into the hieroglyphic text, it just uses KM, but KM is a reference to Cam. Now we're going to move over to reading hieroglyphics. I told you we're going to learn how to read hieroglyphics. Can you see this image here? This jagged edge in Egyptian hieroglyphics makes a k sound. K, k. This is a bird. This is an owl. It makes a sound. This little half circle up here is a half lobe. In Egyptian hieroglyphics, it makes a t sound. So when we put these together, k, t, no vowels, Kemet. Got it? Now, what about this little thing over here? Can you see this little circle over here? This is a symbol that recognizes or depicts rather a crossroad, as in a country or a land. That's what this means, land of. So if we put it all together, we have the land of Kemet. And Kemet is Cam, which is black. Okay. Land of the blacks. This is in the Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is in the tombs of the pharaohs. You can't get away from it. When the European Egyptologists first were able to decode this, for a long time they couldn't, but there was a French explorer named Champollion. This is just something that if you're interested in it, you can look at it. Champollion discovered the Rosetta Stone, and you probably heard of the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone was a key toward interpreting the Egyptian hieroglyphics. And with this, Champollion was able to read KMT, land of the blacks. So that was problematic for the Europeans, who were trying to say that black people never developed anything, were intellectually inferior, blind, dark, not able to learn, never going to learn, are subject to the Hamitic curse, et cetera, et cetera. This posed a problem because they saw all of that intellectual development, all of that brilliance in terms of engineering, archaeology, or architecture rather. They saw medicine, in which we'll talk about further in just a moment. And they said, land of the blacks, this can't be right. And what they said was, their assessment of this was, look, What this symbol means is it is a reference to the fact that the Nile River overflows its banks periodically and it leaves behind rich black soil. So this is a reference to the actual dirt, the land itself. Someone's got their hand up. Go ahead, Sister Delia, speak to us.
I had an opposite question. I'm a part of another group, and I had a question. We're talking about relationships and cultures, and my question is, where did a lot of some of this, the white hate and white anger come from? What tribe were they from? That's my personal question. I'm just trying to tie all of this together to see where this hate came from. So when you mentioned the archaeologists came in, what tribe did they come from, and why are some people, not all people, just so hateful of a particular group of brown individuals?
This is a very good question. Don't have enough time in this class to answer it all, but the short response is that the Europeans are thought to be the descendants of the tribe of Japheth, the descendants of Japheth, which is Noah's first son. Tribes, I don't know that it is referred to as tribes in the book of Genesis simply as descendants of or sons of. So the Europeans are sons of Japheth, but the hate, if you had the benefit of looking at the session 1, and I encourage you to go back and look at session 1, that when the Europeans first interacted with the Africans or the Kemetic people specifically, beginning in the 500 BC, particularly 454 BC, somewhere in there, they didn't come there with a disdaining attitude. They came there to learn. They thought that these African people were advanced. They came there to study medicine. They came there to study astronomy. They came there to study engineering. It wasn't until the Portuguese came in the 14th century and they saw all of the vast resources that were available, that, you know, Africa is the richest continent in terms of natural resources on the face of planet Earth, but it is the people are the poorest people on planet Earth. And so how is that? How is that Africa is the richest planet in terms of natural resources, gold, silver, diamonds, and oil, and other kinds of resources, but the people are the poorest? The reason is that people from other places came in and took the resources and enriched themselves. Chief among them were the Europeans. But in the process of doing this and trying to maintain a cover or a veneer of being Christian, and let me come out of this, stop sharing, because I think it's important for you to see my face and see my expressions when how hyped up I am about it. In the course of trying to justify it and assuage or calm their Christian conscience, they had to lean on some notion that somehow we Black people were cursed. So they came up with this notion of the Hamitic curse, which we discussed at length last week, which said two things. Number one, Black people, because of what happened with Noah and Ham, are cursed to be the servants of white people perpetually. And secondly, as a symbol or a badge of your inferiority, you're going to have Black skin. We debunked that last week, but that's where this antithetical current looking down your nose at Black people, hating Black people, seems to have originated from, with the Europeans that came on the west coast of Africa, but not in Kemet, which is where we are parked in our current conversation. So it was done for money to justify stealing, taking all the precious resources that are still being taken today. And I think the most valuable and the most precious resource that was taken from Africa is its people. The best and the brightest minds. I'm not saying that there are not beautiful, bright, gifted people in Africa today. Of course there are. But some of them are not there. Like you. You're gifted, you're bright, you're beautiful. You're not in Kemet. You're not in Nigeria. You're not in Senegal. Africa is missing a resource. So it's this elaborate scheme to cover. And I may have gone far afield answering the question, but it's a powerful question. It needs to be addressed. It's a cover up for the sake of simply taking. It's about greed.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, that's where my I was just trying to do some soul searching of where this hate originated, and that's why this conversation that you're bringing up about where we come from. And I just wanted just to know that I'll listen to session 1. This is a very valuable question for me.
Okay, I'm going to answer a question in the chat room. There's a question or comment. Chambers, wow, thank you. Listen, okay, all right. Well, all right. Always, I want I want to go on now. Back to sharing the screen, I think. And again, unfortunately, y'all have a challenge to. Can you see this? Back to the outline. All right, now this is just further for those of you who might remotely be interested in that. This is the alphabet, the Egyptian alphabet. So it's symbols. In other words, if you saw a bird, that didn't symbolize a bird, it symbolized a sound. And I showed you this earlier because that's in the hieroglyphics that describes Kemet, right? So, and I showed you this earlier, right? So now we have Kemet. That's what they refer to themselves as. And now I'm at F because I said there's some debate. You know, the Europeans say, no, when the Egyptians said land of the black, what they meant was the black soil. Well, I think that at this point, what we ought to do, and I'm skipping, is we ought to let the Egyptians speak for themselves. You've heard the term "a picture's worth 1,000 words." So this is an image that they have of themselves. What do you think? European? Asian?
Look like a blue brother to me.
Blue brother, you better watch yourself, Tony, but if you want so right, I would have to rebuke you in this session. Oh, that was Nate. Okay, Nate. All right, how about this sister right here? Notice her hair. These are images found inside of Egyptian tombs.
You got a weave on.
I mean, she could fit right in the neighborhood today, right?
Dreadlocks.
Look at her. Look at her lips. This is, I mean, it speaks for itself. The Europeans said, no, what they meant was the black land. And no, they're telling you what they mean themselves. Okay, here's another image. This is an image of one of the pharaohs and his wife.
Pastor Girley.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to share a little testimony. When I went to Egypt, there was a guy, Egyptian, on a camel, and he came up to me. He said, "Hey man, where you from?" I said, "I'm from America." He said, "I just want to let you know that you see some of these Egyptians in their skin color and how it's, you know, kind of mixed or almost white looking." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Egyptians are black people." He said, "The reason you see the different skin tones in their color is when the Europeans came over, and I think you mentioned it in the lesson, when they mixed, you know, intermarried and they mixed, and that's how you get the different skin tones, and they're not as black, dark skin." But he said, "Don't let nobody tell you." He said, "I'm an Egyptian, and I'm telling you that we are black."
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think that was the record. Now, the Egyptians were keen. Thank you for that, brother. That's powerful. The Egyptians were keen on making the record. There's over 4,000 years of written history in Egypt. And we're going to spend some time talking about Egypt. And you may be saying, why? Well, I told you already, it's the land of the blacks. But biblically speaking, I was just doing some research last night. The name Egypt or Egyptian or Egyptians together collectively is mentioned 728 times in the Bible. There's only one nation that's mentioned more, and you can guess what that nation is, right? Israel. Other than Israel, hands down, there is no other nation, there's no other people mentioned more in the Bible than Egypt. So therefore, if the Bible put that much emphasis on Egypt, and wow, we're discovering, we looked at Menes or Neymar, and wow, he's black. Now we're looking at the images that come from the Egyptian tombs, and these people look black. Here's another image that's found in one of the Egyptian tombs. Here's an Egyptian monument of a pharaoh. Well, look at him. What do we see about him? Those lips,
Lips, high
and
cheekbones.
that nose.
Black.
How about this guy right here? Oh, well. It is what it is. This is not Black people from, you know, the African Art Center in Okoye in the West Oaks Mall paintings. This is the Egyptians' renderings of themselves. How about this sister right here? She looked like someone I went to school with. How about this brother right here? These images are in museums. These are actual either statues or paintings that have been removed from Egypt and taken to Germany and places in Europe to be put in Egyptian museums. How about this guy right here? This is the bust of the Pharaoh Huni of the third dynasty. Keep in mind, I showed you Neymar, who started the first dynasty. We're down to the third dynasty, which is 2589 BC. This is an actual bust of him. What does he look like? What do you think?
Yeah, he's Black.
Now, so therefore, let me back up now. When we say that Kemet means Black, and that they're the sons of Ham and Ham is Black, it all kind of lines up. It's there, and I'm backing up to go through the discussion here. So to Sister Adelia's point, Sister Adelia Chambers, which raises a very good question. How did it get to the point where we are so hated? If long ago we were so well respected by the first Europeans, the Greeks and the Romans that sent their kids to Egypt to learn medicine, science, mathematics. Well, I'm going to go down to this guy named Henry Breasted. You see that guy right here, Breasted? He was the first American to establish a school of Egyptology at the University of Chicago. And he wrote this book called A History of the Early World, Volume 1. In that book, he just said in writing that at the end, he said that Egypt was the great white race. Now, and we talked about this a little bit before. What these Europeans have done is they culturally and ethnically try to excise or remove Egypt from the continent of Africa. Why? Because Egypt was such an impressive place in terms of what it accomplished. I just want to give you a quick look at this guy, Henry Breasted, so you can know who he was and how, in terms of who actually started pronouncing this. This is the guy who's responsible for propounding, giving academic weight and authority and credence to the notion that Black people are inferior. He obtained his degree in Egyptology from the University of Germany, I think located at Munich. And what you need to understand back then is the Germans didn't have a very high regard for Black people. And they arguably, some of them still don't. But if you're interested in knowing about how we got to the point where there's this hatred, see, Sister Adelia's question is so important because the hatred that exists against us today didn't just stem up from natural sources. The hatred came from this notion that God created everything on planet Earth for the benefit of white people. And that because of the Hamitic curse, Black people are here to serve and to make white people's lives more interesting and more bearable and more livable. And white people's responsibility toward black people is to bring them into the light, to enlighten them, to teach them about God, to teach them about reading and writing, to teach them how to eat food and not eat it like animals, to refine us. But all of that is totally eviscerated if Egypt happens to be the first great recognized civilization, and it happens to be black. So what this guy did in the silent halls of academia or in the academy is that he gave intellectual cover to something that is still running rampant on the streets of America today. When a black man is pulled over by the police, there's an assumption of criminality that goes all the way back to Henry Breasted. That goes all the way back to those European theologians who said, oh yeah, black people can be treated poorly. Black people can be treated like animals. Black people can be subjugated because God cursed them. So there's this intellectual and moral covering that has been provided that needs to be debunked and unpacked. I'm going to move on. Yes, go ahead.
I looked up some other information about him, and I guess it's all through I would say, the European eyes. You know, he had studied at Chicago Theological Seminary, which I found kind of strange. If he was studying, why would he not go so in depth as we are going in depth? And it appears that he wanted Western civilization to believe that the early civilization of the world started in the Middle East. Instead of going further, it was like he stopped, when he got to the Middle East, instead of going researching even further into Africa. It's like he once he got to the Middle East, information that's where he ended it at. That's where he made it appear that it all started instead of going further. And the Rockefellers, which is a prominent family in Americas during the turn of the century, invested. They spent money in this guy to do this research. So you had wealthy whites in this country, how would I say, financing his studies, and they continue. I mean, you would think the money that they had, that they would have known the truth, but it was all part of the cover. And the last thing I want to say about him was that, which I found kind of strange. After his wife died, he wound up marrying his sister-in-law. I said, my God, was nobody else there available?
What a tragedy. What a tragedy. What idiot would do a thing like that?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, who's talking? Identify yourself.
This is Terry.
Terry, go ahead, Terry.
Because I don't know how to type into, I can't find the text. But this would be my question. This is the question that would seem to this, I would say, just study like you guys are and other people. I would say, then what did Black people do to in the sense of God, that we are permitted to go through this, or we suffer this? Or is it because how he allowed the children of Israel, but that's because they kept not obeying him. He would bring them out of something. They would turn their backs on them. He would let them go back into bondage. Where is it that we have gotten the Black people? How did we fall under? I'm not buying into the curse, but how did we get in this role that we are in reference to the world in general?
Okay, many thoughts. I'm actually in the process of writing a book called The Journey, where it talks about the African people's journey from Africa to where we are in the Western world today. I would say there's some good and bad, and that leads us to this place where we are today. God is interested in getting human beings spread out over the entire planet Earth. God told Abraham that his seed would be enslaved in Egypt for 400 years before it actually happened. But actually what was going on for that 400-year period is that God was growing them to a place where they could become an independent nation. And he was doing it in the most stable environment, because at that time, Egypt was the most powerful political entity on planet Earth. So they had adequate food, they had adequate protection. So it was an incubator nation. So on lecture 27, because we're now on lecture 2, but when we get to lecture 27, if y'all sign up for the advanced class, we'll talk about how that our enemies constantly using things to try to harm us, but God is using it for our good. He's using it to advance us and to grow us and to mature us. There were less than 100 Africans who got off that boat in Jamestown in 1619. Currently, there are approaching, I want to get my math right, 50 million Black people in the United States of America, 50. Not quite there, we're about somewhere between 47 and 48, but we're approaching 50 million. Now, if you can't get from less than 100 to nearly 50 million, and if we were counting them numerically in terms of population, we would, out of the 250 nations, sovereign nations that are recognized by the United Nations, we would be in the top 30 in terms of population and in terms of resources, in terms of money, capital. What we think is a curse, and it has been a slog, it has been dark, and at times it has been darker than what it is presently. And we're not in the promised land yet, and I'm talking about Black people. But what they have meant for our harm, God is ultimately using for our good. You can't say we're under curse if we started at 100 and we're now at 50 million. My argument to you, which we'll go on another day to discuss, is that we've been planted here. The Europeans had negative things in their mind about why they brought us here to abuse and to use us and to use us up and to kill us and to destroy us. But are we destroyed? Are we diminished? Are we defeated?
No.
All right, so that's to Terry's point. To Nate's point, which is a great question. The Rockefellers. Why did the rich and the powerful people support people like Henry Breasted, James Henry Breasted? Because it provided intellectual cover and moral cover for them to continue to exploit the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed. You know, the rich in this country did not get rich by doing what was morally proper. They got rich by stealing. Out the gate, taking Native Americans' land. Am I wrong or am I right? Historically, taking and exploiting. So if we can come behind what they already want to do, which is take everyone's stuff, exploit everyone, abuse everyone, if we can provide some moral and some intellectual cover for that, then that's great. But that's, Brother Nate, that's not something of the past. You ever heard of the Koch brothers?
Yes.
You need to look at, for those of you who have not heard of the Koch brothers, who are billionaires, you need to look at how they have done the same thing behind the scenes. And I'm not speaking for or against a particular party, but you need to understand that there's unseen hands, billionaires behind the scene that are puppeteers, that are putting forth money so that certain narratives can be created in the minds of the unsuspecting, the uninformed masses. This is why this is important for you to do your own due diligence, for you to know what forces are actually trying to influence you one way or the other. You will know the truth, and the truth will do what? Make you free. We're trying to get to the point of freedom. Now, there's some questions in the chat room, and I'm going to try to get to those questions. I'm going to stop sharing, and unfortunately, you're going to have to see my face for a moment so I can get to the questions or comments. Tanja. Yeah, Tanja says Egypt is kind of like the fictional place of Wakanda. Well, actually, Tanja, Wakanda is actually like the real Egypt. But you're getting it. You are getting it. Yeah, did y'all hear that? That's powerful, Tanja. Flesh and blood has not revealed that to you, Tanja, but my Father which is in heaven. Because he wants you to know the truth. He wants us to know the truth about ourselves, that we are not forgotten, that we are not forsaken, that we are not cursed. Yes. In the original Egypt, when Neymar set it up and all of his boys, it was like Wakanda. And it didn't last for 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. It lasted for thousands of years. We've got thousands of years of recorded history. But all of that was suppressed. All of that was wiped away from our minds. Why do you think for 200 years in this country, it was unlawful to teach Black people to read? What were they afraid of? That we would learn the truth about who we are and who they are. And none of this is rooted in hatred, guys. As I said, when I was contemplating teaching this session today, God was speaking to me and he was saying, you got to teach the people to love themselves. And in order for them to love themselves to the point where they can rise up, and I don't mean militarily, I mean dig deep, because there's greatness in each of us. There's a undetermined but wonderful destiny that awaits us, but we have got to tap into the greatness that we brought over from Africa. But we won't even try if we don't know that it was there in the first place. If we don't know that our ancestors did wondrous things in the world. So, but Taj's comment is powerful, because that is one of the takeaways that I hope you get. Now, why is that important? You say, well, that's them. What does it have to do with us? Well, being able to look to someone who has done something great, who looks like you, in and of itself has value. It's inspirational. Let me show you an image, guys. I'm going to share my screen with you again. I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you again. Share. Are we there? Can you see my outline again? Give me a second. I'm trying to get to my desktop. In terms of the power of images. Can you see the image? Hold on one second. Do you recognize who this person is? Hello? When you see this image, what do you think? What do you think about this person? I'm going to stop sharing. What do you think about that person? Anyone? Someone?
That's the girl from the inauguration.
Did it make you, when you saw her and you saw her young, beautiful Black face, did it make you feel nothing, or proud, or sad, or just, what did you think? Anyone in the class?
She was very
She was
powerful.
powerful.
I was noticing my wife. I'll say this. I was noticing my wife, Phyllis. When this young girl was on the screen talking, Phyllis was leaning forward with a big smile on her face. Now, Phyllis don't know this girl from Adam's cat, as they say. Why was she so buoyed by this girl? Because iconography or icons or images matter. So if you've not seen anything beautiful and Black, and everything that you see that is Black is someone being put into a police car because he or she has committed a crime, then you have nothing to reinforce, to suggest to you, or to imply to you that you can be great. But when you see someone like yourself doing something that's great, then it inspires you. Another question, yes, good question. It brings to mind the scripture that says the root of all evil is money. That was Sister Jill, the love of money. Sister Jillian pointed out that the love of money is the root of all evil. Sister Jillian, I agree with you. Let me see if I can get back to my outline. Can you see my outline? No or yes? Let me share. Let me try to share my outline with you. How about now? No, sorry again. How about now? Yes. Sorry, guys. There's a couple of more things that I want to get to here. I'm going to go up because I want to go back to the thing about Kush. I want to show you guys something about Kush. You know, today we're doing double duty. I'm doing double duty because today's Valentine's Day, right? And I want to recognize the fact that we have a lot of Black females who are queens and princesses. Some of you are on this Zoom class, this lecture. I want to recognize my wife, Phyllis, who's my queen. And I want to recognize my daughter, Brooke, who I call Kandake. I call Brooke Kandake, and I want to show you something, and then you'll figure out why I call her Kandake. But I'm also doing this in honor. This is about Kush, by the way. And so it's right in with the lesson. I want to show you this. Can y'all see the screen? Hold on. You see a lion? Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry, sweetie. Mom, it's my last minute. So
Okay, did y'all see that?
where to get me? No, sweetie.
So I refer to Brooke as a Kandaki. You've heard of the Kandakis if you studied the Bible. In the book of Acts, chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch who was over the treasure of Candace, that's the Greek rendering of Kandake. Kandake, Candace is not her name, it's her title, queen. These Cush, same people, these black people, we're talking black people, these same people had an empire, a thriving, powerful empire that lasted for 1,400 years. Now, America think is doing something. We're into our 247th year of existence as a sovereign nation. Cush, the empire of Cush. 500 of these 1,400 years, they were led by Kandakis. Now, why is that important? Because typically when we think about Black women in the Black community today, they play such a strong, powerful role in our community, in our churches, in our schools, and community organizations, service organizations. We think that that's an adaptation because our Black men are in prison and jail, but actually, well, if we're learning our history now, we're learning that actually this thing about elevating our women and looking to them and relying on them and believing that they can do just as much as men, that this is an African tradition that goes all the way back to Cush, where these Kandakes were helping govern and powerful. And this one person, now, Sister Florence, are you still online? You still here with us? I don't know if she's still here or
Yes,
not.
I'm here. I'm
You
here.
have a granddaughter named Omani, don't you?
Yes.
I mean, were you aware that this name Omani goes all the way back to Africa? That it is actually the name of a very powerful African Cushite queen who fought successfully against the Roman army and won. She lost an eye in the process, but she defeated the Roman army.
All right.
You never learned this in your history because they didn't want you to know this. I mean, I say they, the people who, Brother Nate, were trying to advance a notion that Black people have never been anything and therefore they never will be. That the best that we can do is hope to be good servants in the house of the master. The best we can do is hope to have an inside job and not be in the field. Be thankful. And I run into this as a civil rights attorney. I represent people who pick up garbage with dignity on the side of the road, and I represent neurosurgeons, literally, and doctors and lawyers. And when it comes to the Black professionals, what I see consistently is when they're trying to move up in their ranks, often they meet resistance. And the attitude by the establishment is, why are you guys so upset about this? We let you into the company, at least you're not in environmental services cleaning toilets, or you're not outside, not wanting to give them the ability, the opportunity to rise or fall on their own merits. And all that goes back to what James Henry Breasted put into the minds of the white masses and the Black masses who are uninformed. So science, religion, philosophy, they work hand in hand with each other for the sake of creating a soup of ideology to control the masses. So when we talk about we need police reform, well, please understand that police reform is just a low-hanging fruit. If we don't go back and unpack and deal with and debunk this foolishness that James Henry Breasted put up, that the Rockefellers paid for, that the Koch brothers are paying for today, we're going to still have these problems. That's the big picture. There's a comment in the chat room that I need to get to. Let me stop sharing for a moment and see if I can get to that comment. Oh, Lynn's. Okay, Lynn just simply says powerful. Well, I certainly hope that it is powerful, Lynn. I hope that, and I'm excited to know that Brother Nate did something, and I encourage all of you to do the same. I put the links there. I want for you to just dive in and come back, and I commend you. If I had like a silver star, I would give Nate Carrington a star for today, because the point of this is not that I know everything. As I told you at the beginning, I'm a student. I want to learn something. When I come to this class, I genuinely want to learn something. Today, as a teacher, I learned something about this guy. And it's consistent with what I thought about him. I didn't know that he married his sister-in-law. That's some crazy stuff right there. But it's consistent that, you know, these people who are on high moral horses are doing crazy stuff in the background. Maybe that's straining at gnats, swallowing camels kind of thing. I don't know. I don't want to go too far afield. Let me see if I can finish up. We got about 10 more minutes. Oh, okay. She said, we are so powerful. Okay, I want to make sure that I get the quote right. My tech people are saying, Lynn said, we are so powerful. We are powerful. You know, and it's not, the point here is not that we are more powerful than other people, but we are not less than any other people. And in fact, in terms of how civilization evolved, we were on the front end of that. We were on the cutting edge of the development of civilization. And on that point, I want to share one more time something in my outline. I apologize for bouncing around. There's a whole lot of material. It was never my intent to cover it all in such a short time. And you guys have really blessed me by your comments and your input. But I want to share one more thing with you that I think is important. Giving you the reading of Kemet, relatedly, breasted, the links on breasted, racism. There's one more link here that I think this is it right here. To Sister Tanja's point, to Lynn's point, to Brother Nate's point, let's go here to this link. Y'all see that? Mm-hmm. The Black Roots of Egypt's Glory. This was in the actual, I believe, the Washington Post. It's a credible news source, right? 1987. It's talking about this guy right here. We just spoke about him, right? James Henry Breasted, Dean of American Egyptologists, echoed the dominant sentiment of the time that Black Africa had no share in the creation of any first civilization of man. This message was so powerful and so tenacious that as recently as May 31st of 1987, Dr. Edward Blyberg, Assistant Director of Institute of Egyptian Art and Archaeologists in Memphis State, stated categorically in the Memphis Commercial Appeal, Egyptians were considered Caucasians. Why do they want to make them Caucasians? Well, we know. But we already showed you what the Egyptians call themselves, Kamites or as Hamites, and we showed you their images of themselves. I'm going to keep reading. This then is the crux of the controversy that has flared up repeatedly throughout the 155-year existence of Egyptology. The argument continues today. But in the face of ever-increasing evidence that civilization, like the human race itself, began where? In Africa. So this article in the Washington Post back in 1987 talks about the fact that as they go into what the facts are, set aside their emotions, set aside these false theories, and actually look at the science, it says two things, that the origin of humanity is in Africa, and that the origin of civilization. But that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you're the first child, right, Phyllis, you're going to be the first person to get your driver's license, right? And if you can convince your father, Reverend Fillmore, to let you go on to the prom, you're going to be the first one to go to prom. And so on and so forth. If you are the first, you're going to have the first. You're going to develop the first religion. You're going to develop the first science, and so on and so forth. Let's go on. The controversy was opened in 1791 by Franz Count Volney. Do y'all see that? Scholar, world traveler, confidant of Benjamin Franklin, and an aristocrat of pronounced Republican sympathies. In Egypt, he had seen age-old monuments and temples lying half buried in the sand and had pondered the meaning of civilization, its rise and its falls, reflections, and he gave free rein to the ruins of empire. How it is he mused that a people, here's the thing that Sister Delia, if you're still on, the question that you raised is the question that Volney raised back in 1791. And the question that I start out with in the introduction of the session one, which is, how is it, and I'm reading right here, he mused, that a people now forgotten, discovered while otherwise were yet barbarians, when everyone else was barbarians, these people who are now being he's talking about us, okay? The elements of the arts and the science, a race of men now rejected from society for their sable skins and their frizzy hair, founded on the study of laws, nature, civil, religious systems, which still govern the universe. What he's saying, and I'm botching the reading, and I apologize because I'm looking at the time. We're almost 5 minutes out from our end for today. Volney, back in 1791, he went to Egypt. He went there himself. Now I'm making an unshameful plug that perhaps at some point Black people ought to consider visiting Egypt, given everything that we've learned and that we are learning. Volney, who is a white guy from Italy, went there and he studied, and he was wondering, how is it that these people could be so disrespected today, so despised, so disallowed, so disapproved of, when they are the ones who discovered the laws of nature, science and religion and architecture, because of the lie, because of what James Henry Breslin said, that Egypt was a Caucasian people. We know that's not true. We know that from the biblical source now, and we know that from the historical source. And on that note, guys, we're at 11:27. The way that this works is I'll stay here as long as anyone want to ask questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. In each session, we're not going to cover all the material. That's why I'm telling you to read ahead and read in advance, and you'll be able to get more out of it, because when I get in the middle of my conversation, my little mind might go left and right, and I may not cover everything. But I appreciate the engagement today. I appreciate the questions, and I think Brother Nate, you get a star, and I'm being funny. You get a star for today for bringing information, for bringing learning to the class that was not in the outline. And Sister Tanja, you get the trophy for giving us the aha moment, because that's the point that I think that God wants us to get out of this lesson, that Wakanda was actually a real place. But if you go in and you look at, when you go in there and you look at this, what we're going to get to at the end of this session is that it was Egypt, Cush, and Ethiopia together. These are brothers. These are Black brothers, sons of Ham. And they were powerful, and they had their own empires. As I said, Cush had a sovereign empire for 1,400 years. Powerful. And when we get to Ethiopia, we'll, at some point, when we get to how Africa contributed to Christianity, the development and the spread of Christianity, we'll look at an empire called Aksum, A-K-S-U-M, if you want to read ahead. And you'll see that between Aksum, Cush, and Egypt, these are some powerful brothers and sisters. They understood science, they understood philosophy, they understood religion, and they taught it. They freely taught it to any people who would come to where they were. And the early Europeans, the Greeks, and the Romans to a lesser degree, were in awe of them, did not disrespect them. But ultimately, greed got in the way, and greed still drives America's interaction, Europe's interaction with Africa today. I want you to think about that. I said something in passing, I'm going to say it again in closing. Africa, in terms of natural resources, is the wealthiest continent on planet Earth, but the people are the poorest. Europe, resources-wise, is one of the poorest continents on planet Earth, but the people are the wealthiest. How did that work out? How did they become so wealthy and we became so poor, our people? Simple. One group took from the other. And my father used to say this. My father was a cynic and a critic. My mother taught us church. She loved church. She taught us to love Jesus. We love Jesus. And my dad said, yeah, love Jesus, but also keep an eye open, trust, but also verify. He used to say to us that the Europeans came to Africa and to North America with the Bible, and the natives had the land and the gold. When the Europeans went back, the natives had the Bible and the Europeans had the gold. And we are now at the end of our session. And so I'm going to respect your time. But that goes to greed. But Tanja, we're going to dive in more and more into this real live Wakanda, which lasted not for hundreds of years, but for thousands of years. And happy Valentine's to all of the Kandakis that are out there, the Black beautiful sisters, princes and queens. Know that you're living in a rich tradition that goes back thousands of years. Blessings to all of you.